In 1986, Ian Anderson wanted to continue his exploration of electronic textures and bring an edginess to the Tull sound, resulting in what many fans to this day consider to be their worst album. A complete stinker, in fact. But is it really that bad? Ian Anderson's interest in synthetic textures had been well explored with the A album, a divisive album for Tull fans, as well as his solo record from 1983, Walk Into the Light. Nevertheless, this album came across as a bold and, dare I say, unwise venture into the world of drum machines and programming. Nevertheless, it's an album that still to this day evokes a resounding raspberry from the Tull faithful, who dubbed this album, rather than Under Wraps, as utter crap or underpants. But it's a record that certainly utilises the brittle synthesizer sounds of the age. More electronic programming going on than you would find on a Depeche Mode record. Rush were a band that also explored this area in their own sound in the 1980s, but that resulted in two of their finest albums, in my opinion, Signals and Grace Under Pressure. But for the Tull audience, this was a tough old pill to swallow, preferring the Tull sound to be made up of electric guitars, mandolins and flute wheezings, all real ale and rough shag. It was partly the collaboration with Peter John Vitesse, and I think Ian Anderson has tried to shift the blame more in that direction, but I'm having none of it. Of course, it was Ian Anderson that was responsible for programming all the drums and stuff like that. And I think the Tull buck should definitely stop with him. And there was a shift in the songwriting as well at this time, with Ian Anderson expressing a keen interest in Cold War espionage, moving away from all the beasties and mythological creatures and codpieces. And it was an album that was more accepted in the UK. It got to a decent chart position, unlike the USA, of course. And now in the USA, Broadsword and the Beast got to number 19 in the American charts. This album languished at number 76 before being swept under the metaphorical prog rug. And of course the original release was 11 tracks. You had bonus tracks like Tundra, Automotive, Engineering and General Crossing, which appeared as B-sides and bonus tracks. Now of course the CD actually incorporates all 15 tracks as this album. So this album has indeed become infamous amongst Tull fans, many of which who have never listened to it since it came out, in fear of it referencing that traumatised pang on its first spin. So this video, if anything, is an attempt to bring a sense of balance to this narrative. Granted, the plastic production, the electronic burr and sonic bloopery of the production and instrumentation of this record does knock the songwriting down considerably, which is a shame because it's an intriguing record, with themes of espionage fueling some of Anderson's finest writing. And I generally do mean that. I think the songwriting on this record is absolutely excellent. So we've got to ask ourselves, are we guilty of throwing the Tull baby out with the bathwater, so to speak? Under Wraps is bold and it's daring and different, and you could argue it's the attempt by a legacy rock act to step onto the new tundra of the 1980s, leave their comfort zone of their fireside armchair and cup of mead to go all flock of seagulls on us. Under Wraps is brave and ambitious, but it's not terrible. It's an album that is at best polluted, unwise perhaps, doesn't quite work, which is why it's often relegated to the prog bargain bucket along with The Astonishing and Love Beach. I mean, granted, the album does sound awful with its overdone synths, annoying percussive rhythms, and a title track that's stuffed with outdated nods to the production tropes of the 1980s. The contemporary cool, if you will, thin, tinny production that kind of drags the whole thing down. Ian Anderson went kind of all soft sell on us with his previous release, Walk Into the Light, which came out in 1983, which was an okay album, but of course this record carries the weight of expectation of having that Tull moniker on it. I often wonder if Peter Vitesse overshot the mark here. He seems to be working with a rather garish and aggressive palette of sounds and modern FX that smother this whole thing like a pall. But Ian Anderson, surely he would have been the guy that signed off on all this. instead of strutting around sporting a boner for the Fairlight Series 2. Which is why this record was just so ill received, announcing itself for all the furore of a librarian's fart. A kind of hushed squeak that saw this record languish at the lower end of the charts before vanishing completely. I have to wonder, with the Broadsword Deluxe Edition just on the horizon, what a new edition of this album would look like. For me, I would love to see a remix, a complete remix. Do what Pink Floyd did with Momentary Lapse of Reason and give it that timeless quality, excavate it from that horrible plastic fog of the 1980s. Let's make it sound more like a Tull album rather than the Miami Vice soundtrack. And there's some good songs on here, you know, for example, European Legacy, later that same evening Saboteur, Under Wraps 2, but many of these tracks are punctuated by intrusive and unwelcomed electronic flourishes. And some of this just sounds out of place, like the double kick that starts up halfway through Saboteur, or the daft vocal effects on Later that same evening. And it has to be said that the embers of good writing and good compositions here are dampened by such moments. For example, the flatulent synths on Nobody's Car, or the strained and irritating Lap of Luxury. The acoustic reprise of the title track is rather nice, I think, and it provides us with a reward for having to endure the other 14 tracks. I sound as though I'm being very hard on this album, and I tend to be, because I just think there's a really good album in there that just needs to be excavated, to be honest with you. To summarise then, it's some great ideas and great writing on here. Potentially a really good Tull album, which somebody has taken a huge dump upon in order to attempt to be edgy and modern. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think of this record. Please leave your comments below. If you're new to this channel, please be sure to click like, subscribe, and do check that notification bell, as it makes all the difference. And check some of the links below this video for ways you can support the sterling work done at Classic Album Review. It's always much appreciated. So I will leave you with my closing statement, which is, as always, hope you're well, staying safe, but more importantly that you keep listening.